My name is Vivian Hale, and I'm 32. I never thought the day I turned 18 would be the day my life changed forever. I still remember it like it happened yesterday. The heavy slam of our front door as it shut behind me, the bitter taste of betrayal that lingered long after the echo faded. I was standing on the cracked concrete of our driveway, my backpack clutched tightly to my chest, and my parents' faces were cold, unreadable. My mother's eyes were a mixture of sadness and pride, or so I had thought, but the words that left her lips cut deeper than any knife. "This is for your sister's future, Vivian. We can't have you here holding her back." My heart twisted in disbelief. My sister, Lila, was 15 at the time, barely a teenager. And yet, somehow in my parents' eyes, my entire existence had become a threat to her. I was being kicked out at 18, homeless, left to survive on my own, while my own family pretended it was a noble sacrifice for someone else. I couldn't even cry. I couldn't even scream. I just stood there, numb, watching the life I had known dissolve in the afternoon sun. But before I tell you what happened next, I want you to pause for a moment and think. Have you ever been abandoned by someone you trusted most? Because if you have, you know that sharp, cold ache of realizing the people who were supposed to protect you can sometimes hurt you the most. And if you haven't, I hope my story shows you the kind of resilience that comes from being forced to fight for your own worth. Stick with me. You'll see why, years later, fate had a very strange plan for me, one I could never have imagined. Looking back, it wasn't always like this. Lila and I used to be inseparable, at least in my mind. She was the golden child, of course, the beautiful, charming little sister who could do no wrong, the one who could smile at my parents and melt their hearts in an instant. I, on the other hand, was invisible, quiet, observant, careful. I had good grades, sure, but it was never enough to earn my parents' approval. I wanted so badly to be loved, to feel like I belonged. But every small failure, every misstep was amplified in their eyes, while Lila's tiniest success was a festival of applause. I remember when she won her first school award for Best Young Artist. My parents hugged me and smiled, but the words "we're so proud of her" were never addressed to me. It was subtle at first, then not subtle at all. And by the time I turned 18, the message was clear. I wasn't wanted in my own home. The first night after they kicked me out, I slept under the awning of a closed bakery. The city lights blurred through the fog, and for the first time in my life, I was truly alone. I felt my own heartbeat loud in the silence, a reminder that I was still alive, still breathing, still capable of surviving. I had no money, no friends I could call, just the bag on my shoulder and a pounding sense of betrayal. But even in that darkness, something inside me flickered, a stubborn spark of defiance. If my parents thought they could erase me, they were wrong. I would rise, and when I did, they would see exactly what they had thrown away. Survival wasn't easy. I bounced between shelters, couch surfed with acquaintances who barely knew me, and took on any job that would keep me fed. I worked in a diner, a bookstore, and even cleaned offices at night. Each day was exhausting, and every night I cried myself to sleep, wondering if my parents were sleeping comfortably in their beds while I fought to exist. But I also learned something I never knew about myself. I was resilient. I discovered an inner strength that thrived on adversity. I began to write about my experiences, pouring my anger, my loneliness, my tiny victories into a journal I carried everywhere. Words became my sanctuary. They reminded me that even if the people I loved most had abandoned me, I could still love myself enough to keep going. The years blurred together, a montage of struggle and small triumphs. By 21, I had moved into a small apartment I could barely afford, working two jobs and attending night school. By 24, I had my first promotion at a marketing firm, and a small circle of friends who became the family I had lost. I was still haunted by my parents' betrayal, but I was learning to live with it, to channel the pain into motivation. And then came the day I learned Leela had applied to the very same college I had dreamed of attending. That should have been a moment of pride, of joy for her. Instead, it was complicated. I had worked so hard, scraping through life to create an identity independent of my family. And here was Leela, riding the wave I had built from nothing. And somehow the thought of her benefiting from the same life I had clawed my way toward left a bitter taste in my mouth. I avoided contact for years. Birthdays, holidays, milestones, I watched from a distance, silently cheering but never reaching out. Leela grew into a confident, beautiful young woman. Her social media posts showed her smiling with our parents, laughing at family gatherings I wasn't invited to. My heart ached in ways that were familiar and also new. Love and resentment tangled in knots I couldn't unravel. I wanted to forgive. I truly did. But forgiveness felt like surrender, and I wasn't ready to surrender. Not yet. And then, 7 years later, the twist of fate arrived in the form of a professional opportunity I never expected. I had been working as a rising star in broadcast journalism, my reputation built on integrity, storytelling, and the ability to see beyond the obvious. One morning, my editor called with an assignment, a live interview for a prime-time segment on rising young talents in the arts. And the subject of the story? None other than my little sister, Leela Hale. My stomach dropped. My heart raced. Part of me wanted to refuse, to run, to avoid confronting the past entirely. But another part, the part that had been tempered in the fires of abandonment, recognized the opportunity. This was my chance, not just as a journalist, but as the older sister who had been cast aside. I would meet Leela not as the discarded child, but as an equal, professional, and unbroken. The night before the interview, I couldn't sleep. Memories crashed into me, the slammed door, the whispered justifications, the nights spent in shelters, the endless struggle to carve out a life when my family had deemed me unnecessary. I rehearsed questions I would ask, tones I would use, everything professional on the surface, but underneath, a storm brewed. Could I hide the past? Could I remain neutral? Could I ask questions that cut without shattering the fragile veneer of her carefully curated public image? The thought alone made my hands shake. And then, in the quiet, a nagging fear crept in. What if she remembered me as the sister who was gone, the one who wasn't there for her? What if she hated me too? When the day came, I walked into the studio with my heart pounding, scripts in hand, makeup carefully applied to conceal the nervous tremor in my expression. And then there she was, Leela Hale, smiling, poised, radiant, the same girl I had once adored, the same girl my parents had elevated above me. She didn't recognize me immediately, or course, or maybe she did and chose to mask it. Either way, there was a distance, a carefully constructed barrier between us. And I realized in that moment that this interview wasn't just about professional achievement. It was about confronting a lifetime of neglect and proving without a single word of accusation that I had survived, I had thrived, and I was no longer the girl who had been kicked out for someone else's future. I greeted her politely, and the camera started rolling. My questions were measured, incisive, but I could feel the tension building beneath the surface. Each answer she gave, each carefully crafted smile, only intensified the storm within me. Then came the moment I hadn't anticipated, the live audience question segment. A young viewer asked Leela about the sacrifices she had made to reach her position. And in that instant, a flash of memory hit me. My own sacrifices, the years spent abandoned, the nights I had cried alone, the relentless struggle to survive. I realized I could either remain silent, allow her to shine unchallenged, or I could seize the moment and assert my presence, quietly, but undeniably. My pulse quickened, my palms sweated, and I knew that what happened next would change everything between us. As I leaned forward to ask a follow-up question, I noticed something on her face. A flicker, a hesitation, a momentary crack in the polished exterior. And in that split second, I understood. Leela had known all along that I had been out there, fighting, surviving, becoming someone she couldn't ignore. And she had prepared for me. She had perfected her public image for this exact encounter. But would she reveal the truth? Would she betray the carefully constructed narrative she had built around herself? Or would she let me, the forgotten sister, reclaim a piece of the story she had thought was entirely hers? The studio lights felt hotter, the cameras sharper, and my heart raced with anticipation, dread, and an unexpected thrill. And then she smiled, a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, and said something that stopped me cold. "Vivian, I've been waiting for this moment too." And just like that, the past collided with the present, and I realized that the interview wasn't just about her success. It was about everything we had lost, everything we had hidden, and everything that was about to crash into the open. I paused, my mind racing, my chest tight, and I knew with a mix of fear and exhilaration that nothing would ever be the same. This was only the beginning. The studio lights were blinding, and for a moment, I couldn't see anything but Leela's face. Her calm, measured expression was infuriating and mesmerizing all at once. I realized in that instant that I had underestimated her. 7 years apart had changed both of us, but she had changed in ways I hadn't anticipated. The girl I remembered, innocent, spoiled, adored, was gone. In her place was someone polished, confident, and aware of every move I could make. And yet beneath that poise there was a tremor. I could see it, even from across the desk. "Vivian," she repeated, leaning slightly forward, "I've always wondered how you turned out the way you did." I froze. My pulse spiked. How could she know? Was this a trap? Was this a subtle way to mock me, to remind me that even after all these years, she held some form of power over me? I forced myself to smile, nodding politely. "I guess we both had to make our own paths," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside. That single phrase carried so much weight. It was true, of course, but it was also a challenge. 7 years ago, I had been forced out of my home, abandoned for her sake, and yet here I was, successful, recognized, independent, and she was the little sister who had never had to fight the world alone. Yet something in her tone told me she knew that. After the cameras cut, we moved to a smaller room to discuss the segment's details. The tension was almost tangible, a silent current pulling at every word. I noticed the subtle ways she avoided eye contact when I mentioned my journey, the careful phrasing of her words as if she was measuring every sentence to avoid revealing too much. I wanted to ask her about the past, about the years she had lived while I struggled outside our front door, but I hesitated. There was a strange mix of fear and anticipation inside me. I knew that if I pushed too hard, she would shut down completely. But if I remained silent, would I be allowing her to rewrite history without challenge? It was then that the memories came rushing back, memories I had tried to bury. I remembered the day I had packed my things, the bitter taste of rejection, and the silent scream of humiliation that had followed me out of the house. I had walked past our neighbors' windows, hoping no one would see me, praying that the ground would swallow me whole. I had begged my parents to reconsider, tears streaming down my face, only to be met with cold, rational words about sacrifice, family, and her future. My mother had kissed my cheek and whispered, "It's for the best, Viv." But it wasn't for the best. It was for Leela. It had always been for Leela. And that truth had been like a stone tied to my chest, dragging me down into despair I couldn't escape. I looked at her now and I saw that same girl I had once loved in flashes, her sharp chin, the curve of her lips, but also a stranger. She had grown, yes, but at what cost? I wondered if she had known how much I had suffered, if she had ever considered my pain. The thought gnawed at me, but I couldn't allow it to dominate the moment. I was here to do a job. I was here to tell a story. And yet, part of me craved a confrontation, a raw and honest moment where the truth between us could no longer be ignored. We began filming the segment, our professional facades in place, but underneath, the air was electric. Each question I asked carried layers of unspoken meaning. Each answer she gave seemed rehearsed, almost theatrical. Yet there were moments when I glimpsed her humanity. Those fleeting cracks in her polished exterior where the girl I had once known still existed. I wanted to reach out to her, to bridge the gap of years and pain, but the memory of that slammed door, the nights I had cried in alleyways, the endless struggle to survive alone reminded me that some bridges were built slowly, brick by brick. During a commercial break, I stepped into the hallway to gather my thoughts. I leaned against the wall, my hands shaking slightly, trying to breathe through the tension. I couldn't help but think about the people who had abandoned me, my parents. Their justification had always been Leela's future, but I knew better now. It wasn't just about her, it was about favoritism, about control, about keeping me small so that their preferred child could shine. And the worst part? They had never apologized, never acknowledged the years I had spent alone. They had moved on as if nothing had happened. A memory hit me sharply. The Thanksgiving dinner I had missed, the silent dining room where Leela sat between my parents, laughing, while I scavenged leftovers from a convenience store. I had written letters to them, heartfelt messages begging for understanding, for connection, for even a shred of compassion. None had been answered. And yet here I was, sitting across from the very sister I had been forced to leave behind, in a room full of cameras and lights, pretending that everything was normal, pretending that 7 years of neglect could be ignored with a few polite smiles and professional questions. And then came the unexpected moment. A producer approached me with a folded piece of paper. "This came for you," she said, a hint of confusion in her voice. I unfolded it carefully and my heart stopped. It was a text from an unknown number, but the words were unmistakable. "I know what they did to you. I've always known. Meet me after the segment." My pulse quickened. Who could it be? Was it Leela? Was it someone from my past? And what exactly did they know? I tried to shake it off, but the feeling of being watched, of secrets waiting to unravel, pressed down on me. I returned to the set, my hands slightly trembling under the desk. Leela noticed, of course, but she said nothing, only raising an eyebrow with that subtle, knowing look that made my stomach twist. She knew. She always knew more than she let on. And I realized, in that moment, that this interview wasn't just about careers or achievements. It was about truths that had been buried for years, truths that were about to explode in ways I could never have prepared for. The segment ended smoothly, or at least on the surface. Cameras cut, crew members began to pack up, and I finally allowed myself a moment of relief, but it was short-lived. Leela approached me, her smile softer now, almost tentative. "Vivian, can we talk?" My mind raced. This was it. The confrontation I had avoided, the conversation I had dreamed of, the moment where years of pain could finally surface. I nodded, following her into a quiet corridor behind the studio. The walls were lined with posters of past interviews, images of people I barely recognized, but all I could focus on was her. "Vivian," she began, her voice low, almost a whisper. "I know you've suffered. I know what they did, and She paused, as if weighing her words carefully. My heart pounded in anticipation, bracing for either apology or defiance. "I never wanted you to leave. I tried to tell them." Her eyes filled with tears, but the words stopped there. She looked away, biting her lip, her vulnerability stark against the confident facade she wore moments ago. I wanted to reach out, to grab her and demand the truth, but I held back. I needed more than fragments of confession. I needed answers. Leela, I said slowly, tell me everything. From the beginning. She hesitated, glancing down at the floor, and then something in her expression changed. A flicker of fear, perhaps? Or realization. She whispered, almost to herself, they're not the only ones who hid things from you. And then she stepped back, her hand hovering near a door I hadn't noticed before. Vivian, you need to see this. It's time you knew everything about our family. My stomach dropped. What secrets had she uncovered? What had they hidden from me all these years? My hands shook, my heart raced, and for the first time in years, I felt a mix of fear and hope that something unexpected, something earth-shattering was about to change my life forever. The door opened slowly, and what I saw made me stagger back, my breath catching in my throat. The door creaked as I stepped inside, and my breath hitched. The room beyond was dimly lit, lined of shelves of files, photographs, and letters stacked in organized chaos. Leela motioned me to come closer, her hand trembling slightly. Vivian, everything you think you knew, it's only a fraction. I felt a chill run down my spine. My mind raced, remembering the years I'd spent abandoned, the nights I had cried into my pillow, the bitter loneliness of being told I wasn't wanted. And now here was Leela, standing as my guide into the maze of our family's secrets. I took a hesitant step forward, my eyes scanning the room. Every photograph seemed familiar, yet different. Images of our parents smiling at family events, snapshots of Leela laughing, and then a few subtle pictures of me, cropped or partially hidden. I realized then that my absence had always been deliberate, carefully curated to erase me from the story our parents wanted to tell. The realization hit harder than I expected. They hadn't just abandoned me. They had tried to rewrite history, and Leela had been complicit in some ways, even if unknowingly. She handed me a thick envelope, labeled in neat, spidery handwriting. Vivian, truth you deserve. My hand shook as I opened it. Inside were letters, legal documents, and photographs. My eyes fell on a series of letters exchanged between my parents and a lawyer around the time I turned 18. I scanned the words, each one a knife twisting deeper into my chest. We must ensure Leela's future. Vivian's presence is a distraction. Arrangements for alternative living are complete. Alternative living. That sterile phrase masked the agony of a child being thrown into the world alone, left to fend for herself while the rest of the family thrived without consequence. I looked up at Leela, tears welling in my eyes. You knew about this? I asked with my voice trembling. She shook her head quickly. No, I didn't know the details, Vivian. I didn't know that they would literally kick you out. I only knew that I was the one they favored, and I thought it was normal. Her hands clutched mine, warm and shaking. I never wanted you to suffer. I was just a kid too, trying to survive their rules. But now you see. I swallowed hard, a mix of relief and anger boiling inside me. Part of me wanted to scream, to demand justice, to ask why they had treated me like I was disposable. Another part of me, the part that had survived, wanted to hold her close, to acknowledge that we were both victims of the same manipulations. The room seemed to close in, suffocating with tension, and I realized the depth of the betrayal extended far beyond my parents. The very foundation of my childhood, of my family, had been built on secrecy, favoritism, and careful control. As I flipped through more documents, another revelation hit me. A letter, unsigned but familiar in tone. If Vivian discovers the truth, she must be reminded of her place. Keep her distracted with jobs. Move her out. We cannot allow her presence to threaten the plan. My hands trembled. I recognized the handwriting instantly. It was from my father's closest friend, someone I had trusted as an ally, someone who had ensured I had no safety net. My blood ran cold. Not only had my parents betrayed me, but others in their circle had actively conspired to keep me powerless. I realized that my entire world had been shaped by a network of manipulation I had been too young, too naive to understand. Lila looked at me, her eyes wide. I didn't know he was involved either, she whispered. Guilt and fear intermingled in her expression. I found this by accident, going through some old papers in the attic. I didn't know what it all meant until I started piecing it together. My hand shook and I sank into a chair, the weight of years pressing down on me. Memories surged. The times I had been ignored, humiliated, and forced to fight for every scrap of dignity. And now, with these documents in front of me, the emotional wounds I had carried in silence for years felt rawer than ever. I wanted to lash out, to scream at my parents for everything they had done. I wanted vengeance. But I also felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Clarity. I finally understood the forces that had shaped my life. And for the first time, I could see a path forward that didn't depend on their approval or manipulation. Just then, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number flashed on the screen. Meet me tonight. Everything you need to know about your family and Lila's role will be revealed. Come alone. I froze. My heart raced. Who was this? How did they know I was with Lila? And more importantly, could I trust them? Lila noticed my hesitation. Vivian, are you okay? She asked softly. I felt a surge of emotion. Love, fear, anger, all swirling together. I nodded, though my mind was a storm of uncertainty. I need to find out more. I need to know the full truth, I whispered. She looked at me, conflicted, but she didn't argue. Somehow, she knew that this was a path I had to take alone. I spent the rest of the day in a haze, my mind replaying the scenes of my childhood, the cruelty, the neglect, and now, the revelations about hidden schemes, betrayals, and conspiracies. My apartment felt smaller than ever, suffocating with memories I had tried to suppress. I tried to focus on my work, but my thoughts kept drifting back to that envelope, the letters, and the mysterious message. Every shadow, every sound felt like a prelude to confrontation. That evening, I made my way to the location indicated in the message. A small, dimly lit cafe on the edge of the city, quiet and isolated. My heart pounded with every step. The streets felt unfamiliar, threatening. Yet familiar memories of fear and survival sharpened my instincts. I had walked these streets as a scared 18-year-old. And now, I was walking them as a woman who had survived and thrived despite the odds. When I entered the cafe, the lights were low, and a single figure sat at a table in the corner, their face obscured by the shadow. They motioned me over. I recognized the voice immediately, sending a shiver down my spine. Vivian, it said, calm, deliberate. I've been waiting for you. There are things you need to know about your parents, about Lila, about everything they've kept from you. My stomach twisted. I had thought I understood the betrayal, thought I had pieced together the manipulation. But now it seemed there were layers I hadn't imagined. My hands trembled. I leaned closer. Tell me everything, I demanded. The figure nodded, eyes glinting with a mixture of fear and urgency. Everything, Vivian. But once you know, nothing can ever be the same again. And just like that, my world tilted on its axis. The betrayal, the secrets, the lies, they weren't finished. They had only just begun to unravel. I felt a mixture of dread and anticipation, knowing that the truth waiting for me would either shatter me completely or give me the power I had been seeking for years. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. I was ready, but I had no idea how much the revelation would change everything I thought I knew about my family, my sister, and myself. The cafe felt colder than I remembered, the dim light casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward me like fingers, pulling me into the secrets I had chased for years. I stared at the figure across from me, the one whose presence stirred memories I had tried to bury: betrayal, manipulation, and the countless nights I had cried in silence. Their face was familiar, almost comforting in a twisted way, but their words promised revelations that would shatter the fragile control I had over my emotions. "You're here," they said softly. "That's the first step. But now you need to understand what really happened. The decisions your parents made, the lies they told, and the role Leela played, whether she realized it or not." I leaned forward, gripping the edge of the table. "Tell me everything. I'm ready." My voice was calm, but inside I felt the familiar mix of fear, anger, and anticipation that had defined my life for the past 7 years. They took a deep breath. "When you turned 18, your parents believed Leela's potential depended on eliminating distractions. They truly thought, foolishly, that by pushing you away, they were ensuring her future. But it wasn't just that. They were also hiding financial troubles and family scandals they didn't want you involved in. Every move, every word, every manipulation, they orchestrated it so that you would leave quietly, unaware of the full picture." My chest tightened. "And Leela?" I asked, my throat dry. "Did she know?" The figure shook their heads slowly. "At first, no. But as she grew older, she started piecing things together. She witnessed your absence, the subtle way your parents erased your presence, and it created guilt she didn't know how to express. She became trapped between loyalty to you and the fear of defying the people who had always controlled her life. And that's why today, when you confronted her, she was so guarded. She's carried the weight of the secret as much as you have carried the pain." I felt a lump in my throat. The realization was overwhelming. My little sister, the golden child, had been caught in a web of manipulation too. But unlike me, she hadn't had to fight alone. She had never endured the nights without shelter, the relentless struggle for survival. My mind replayed every injustice, every humiliation I had suffered, and I realized that forgiveness would be complicated, but understanding was possible. The figure slid a folder across the table toward me. "Here," they said. "These are documents, emails, and letters proving everything. Read them, and you'll understand the full scope. Then you can confront them on your terms." I opened the folder with trembling hands. Every document was a revelation. Contracts, emails, letters, proof of my parents' calculated decisions, my father's lawyer conspiring with family friends, and evidence that Leela's innocence had been manipulated, intentionally or not. My anger surged, a tidal wave I had spent years containing. But alongside it was a strange sense of liberation. I finally had the truth. I could finally face my parents and claim my narrative. Leela appeared beside me, hesitant but resolute. "Vivian, I want you to see everything. I can't undo the past, but I deserve to know." Her eyes glistened with tears. "I've been living with guilt too, and I want us to be honest with each other now." We spent hours going through the files, reading every letter, every hidden communication, and every deception. With each page, my anger mingled with sadness, but also with clarity. I realized that my parents' betrayal, while cruel, had forged my resilience. It had shaped the woman I had become, strong, independent, and capable of facing the truth without crumbling. And seeing Leela's remorse, her sincere desire to bridge the gap, softened the edges of my pain. When we finished, I looked at her and took a deep breath. Leela, I've hated you. I've envied you. I've mourned the life I lost while you were protected. But I also see now that we were both victims of the same system. I can forgive you, but I need boundaries. I need to protect myself from being hurt again. She nodded, relief flooding her expression. I understand, Vivian. I'll do whatever it takes to rebuild our relationship, not to erase the past, but to honor the truth. The next step was confronting our parents. I arranged a meeting at my apartment, a neutral space where I could remain in control. When they arrived, their faces were masks of surprise and concern, carefully crafted to hide the guilt they must have felt, or perhaps the arrogance of assuming they could manipulate me again. Vivian, my mother began, voice trembling slightly. Save it. I know everything. I know about the letters, the emails, the plans to push me out. I know how you manipulated Leela and everyone else to keep me invisible. I know why you did it, and I understand the reasoning behind your fear of losing control. But I am not powerless anymore. My father's face went pale, his carefully rehearsed expressions faltering. Vivian, it was for Leela's future. For Leela's future? I repeated, voice rising. Do you even hear yourselves? You erased me. You humiliated me. You forced me into the world alone, all to create a perfect life for the one you already favored. Do you have any idea what that did to me, to my heart, my confidence, my sense of self? They remained silent, but the shame in their eyes was unmistakable. I continued, my voice firm but calm. I'm not here to destroy you. I'm here to set boundaries. I am reclaiming my story, my life, and my peace. You will no longer control me, and you will no longer manipulate my relationship with Leela. If you want to be part of our lives, you must acknowledge your actions and respect the autonomy I fought so hard to achieve. The room was heavy with silence. My parents looked at each other, then at me, as if seeing me for the first time. And in that moment, I felt a surge of power I had never known. Not arrogance, but a deep, unshakable sense of self-worth. I had survived, I had thrived, and I had claimed the truth. After they left, Leela and I sat together, exhausted but relieved. I've been so scared of losing you, she admitted quietly. I thought if I confronted the truth, you'd hate me forever. I smiled softly. I won't lie, the hurt runs deep, but I also see now that forgiveness doesn't erase the past. It frees us from it. We can rebuild, slowly, carefully, but this time on our terms. The room was heavy with silence. My parents looked at each other, then at me, as if seeing me for the first time. And in that moment, I felt a surge of power I had never known, not arrogance, but a deep, unshakable sense of self-worth. I had survived, I had thrived, and I had claimed the truth. After they left, Leela and I sat together, exhausted but relieved. I've been so scared of losing you, she admitted quietly. I thought if I confronted the truth, you'd hate me forever. I smiled softly. I won't lie, the hurt runs deep. But I also see now that forgiveness doesn't erase the past. It frees us from it. We can rebuild, slowly, carefully, but this time on our terms, together. Over the next few months, we reconnected cautiously. Therapy sessions, long talks, and honest reflections helped us heal. Leela became not just my sister, but my ally, a partner in navigating the aftermath of our parents' manipulations. I learned to set boundaries, to recognize toxic behavior, and to protect my own emotional well-being without guilt. And in the process, I discovered something profound. The past does not define you. Your choices in the present do. The greatest lesson I learned through all of this was that betrayal, no matter how deep, can be transformed into power, clarity, and self-respect. The family that abandoned me, the sister who unknowingly participated in my exclusion, and the people who conspired to keep me small, they shaped me, yes, but they could not break me. I reclaimed my narrative, and in doing so, I discovered the strength to love without losing myself. As I sit here today, reflecting on the years of struggle, survival, and revelation, I feel an immense sense of peace. I am no longer the scared 18-year-old standing on the driveway, abandoned and alone. I am Vivian Hale, 32, resilient, empowered, and unbroken. And I finally understand that the most important family is the one you choose, the people who respect, support, and value you for who you are, not what you represent to them. So to everyone listening, I ask, have you ever faced betrayal from those you trusted most? Have you been abandoned, manipulated, or silenced? I want you to share your story in the comments because your voice matters, your pain matters, and most importantly, your healing is possible. And as for me, I look at Leela and smile, knowing that the future is ours to build together, stronger, wiser, and free from the shadows of the past.